only second to open source operating system adoption, such as Linux. So that is really, really high. If you look at the other source of data, DB engine ranking, we can also see what for a lot of years we really saw a lot of closing gaps between the open source database and the proprietary databases, and we can see it's kind of a little bit slowed recently, and maybe there is even kind of a reverse trend over the last year or so, which is probably because of the cloud, which I'm going to talk about later. What I found also very interesting and exciting is if you look at the open source versus commercial databases and look at by the different database access pattern, then we can see what all those new approaches to the data, such as wide column stores, such as Cassandra, key value stores, time series, document sourcing, all of those new approaches to working with your data, the open source database technology is really leading the way with a huge gap, and it's only kind of more old, well-known database access model like relational database where you can see, or others like object-oriented database when you can see closed source technologies being much better. So I think on this show for us, for our database, open source database community, we can see a lot of very cool things happening or about to happen. We just got to MySQL 8 as a release candidate, and that release looks absolutely fantastic from my standpoint. In our kind of friendly competitor, Postgres, the Postgres 10 also looks very fantastic what that is happening in that community, and I think that's really puts the open source database community really forward. You can do a lot more with open source database than you could ever do before. I'm also very excited about Facebook work in RocksDB, where a lot of newer database technologies are using RocksDB as a backend, and I just saw the post from yesterday with Facebook have migrated yet another some massive data store from InnoDB to RocksDB, and found a lot of efficiency improvements from that. So that is fantastic. I'm also very excited about the ClickHouse release. That is another interesting technology which gives us an open source massively parallel column store, which is really very well optimized, and it's a lot faster than a lot of other stuff which I have seen. Now, while there is a lot of momentum going, I think there are also some challenges which we see in the open source data community, which I would classify as erosion of the meaning of open source, business model challenges, and sort of seductive convenience of the cloud. So what do I mean here? Well, if you look at the erosion of the meaning of the open source, I see a lot of companies in the open source space is using open source term pretty much as a marketing, while really their software is not open source. It's not at least free and open source completely. So it is, for example, very hard for me to explain how is open source, as Percona talks about that, is different, for example, open source as an Amazon RDS, right? Or open source in MongoDB case, right? This is both companies, all companies, they use open source for marketing, but really it is a very different kind of open source, right? You are getting. Now, if you think about the open source business model, I think, well, it's well known what the open source is not a business model, right? Open source can be seen as the distribution model, that's your licensing model, but really open source doesn't really give you any guidance how exactly you are going to make money, which is what a business model is. And we can see very well, and I think in the last year in particular, what finding working business model for open source software is actually hard. over the last year, we can see some companies which started with the idea, hey, we will be, completely free and open source software, and we'll release all of our software as an open source. Had to do some changes, right, and evolve their business model. InfluxDB and CockroachDB both essentially evolved to open core business model. And there are also some other companies which closed the door, such as RethinkDB or Basho, the company behind the React. They did not really find the working business model for they are fantastic open source software which a lot of users were using. Now, when I speak about the convenience of a cloud, is what I see a lot of pure open source software is losing in usability and convenience to cloud-based deployments. I think while we can say what the MySQL is easy to do, right? Well, it's much easier to roll out the Amazon RDS, right, to Aurora cluster compared to do that manually, right, with MySQL. And another thing of the cloud, which I found interesting, is because you are always paying something for a cloud, right? I mean, even if you choose to run something as a basic infrastructure as a service, when that kind of masks the difference between the software which is commercial, right, and there's some license cost baked in, versus running just open source software. It's not becomes between, you are not paying anything for the licenses, right, or you are paying for the licenses, but it's pretty much just how much you are paying to run the infrastructure in the cloud. Well, what I also find interesting in this case is, of course, the cloud often provides us with one-way compatibility street, or another maybe more known metaphor could be the Hotel California, where it's very easy to check in, right, because it's very easy to migrate your application to the cloud, but then it's maybe much harder to move it back to a completely open source software once you start relying on those features that cloud provides. So, with all of that, how do really I believe the future is going to look? Well, and I believe what the future is hybrid. Well, not a great insight there, right? Perhaps, but what do I mean by that? I mean what we are going to have a mix of software deployed where is going to be fully proprietary software, right? And I am not open source zealot to believe is what, in a few short years, all the last piece of proprietary software is going to die, right? Well, I don't believe that's going to happen, because there is a lot of a good place for open source software, and there is certain areas where it's very hard to find a way, to create open source software. We also will have, I believe, a lot of partly open source solutions, right? Open core and similar model where you are going to get some things open source, but some extra models, extra features, extra convenience will not be available in open source version. And there are also going to be a lot of 100% free and open source software, which is going to get better, and there is going to be getting more of that. Now, I also believe that we are going to get this evolution happening in the cloud as well, right? As we often see the cycle in the software, I believe that we are going to be getting new ways to really get usability in the cloud without vendor lock-in through really high quality and easy to use open source software, which will be catching up with what proprietary cloud solutions have to offer. I see a lot of this excitement in open source development, such as the operating system for your data center, which really would allow us to work with large sets of servers very easily and conveniently, as we can pretty much deploy MySQL and MongoDB on a single Linux, right, in 5 minutes, right, from open source repositories. We will be able to do that with our data center scale as well in a few years. And I'm also very excited with some other platforms which are being developed, such as container platforms with Mesosphere, Red Hat, and OpenShift, and others. Now, what do we see our role at Percona in all of that? Well, our purpose in Percona, or another word for mission, is to champion open source database software solutions. That is kind of maybe a mouthful, but it's every word is important for us here. And what really that means for us is what all the software which we distribute is 100% free and open source, right? So we're doing the open source for real. There is no open core or open source eventually or any other stuff. And really what we are focused out here is finding solutions to maximize your success. We don't believe what everything out there has to be developed by Percona, but rather we focus our engineering efforts where we see there are the gaps in open source software offerings. We also work to advance the open source database kind of agenda as a whole, and really we help a lot of companies with open source strategy and migration consulting. So if you are migrating to open source database, then possibly MySQL and MongoDB, two areas we focus on, is not going to cover everything for you, and we will tell you that and hopefully point you to the right directions where you can get help, for example, for Elastic or Postgres or Cassandra. And with all of our services, there is no vendor lock-in required, well, because our software is free and open source. We provide a broad software ecosystem support, right? So in many people being surprised when they say, well, you know what? You don't have to run Percona server or other Percona software to get support from Percona. We support MySQL, we support MariaDB, Percona server, we support a cloud software offering, we support the whole ecosystem, because depending on your individual circumstances, I believe different mix of software may be the most appropriate for you to run. And we are really working very well with supporting the ecosystem as a whole. We understand what the database is just being very small part of your infrastructure, and it's very important to understand how do you really integrate and run appropriately database with all those other cloud technologies, container technologies, and other modern infrastructure technologies that are out there. So our role in this hybrid world is, while we believe there is going to be a lot of commercial software and a lot of partly open source software, we want to really advance what you can do with completely free and open source software. And I don't believe it's ever going to be 100% of applications you can build on free and open source software, but that is going to be majority of our applications where you can do it, and that's going to be sense. What we want you to get from that is pretty much to maximize your freedoms, which open source or free and open source software offers you, as well as to minimize the software vendor lock-in, because it's never fun to be in hostage, right? Well, actually there is a Stockholm syndrome out there, but that is a whole another story. And if you think about our business model, well, as any company, we need to make money. And for us, we are different from other technology which classify themselves as a technology company focused on really building their technology and pushing that forward. We see ourselves as tech-enabled service company, which happen to be specializing in open source software. So yes, we see ourselves as a service company. I know that is not very kind of fashionable or very much respected by venture capitalists and some other groups of people, but we are proud in being a service company, and I think that is a really very important role in the ecosystem which we serve. Now, one thing, or one quote I like to also heard back from Martin Mikas, MySQL CEO of, now it was maybe 15 years ago when I worked on MySQL, is what the way to making money in open source software is through those, right? There are some people who would spend money to save time, and there are other people, right, who have a lot of time on their hands. They just would like to do things on their own to save money. And I think that is correct, but I think there are more things that a company like Percona can provide. And this is reducing the risks, right? Additionally to the time factor is a risk factor, right? If you ever have, for example, medical need, right? You wouldn't probably get somebody to learn by the book, right? And to try to, whatever, do whatever, right? Thinking, well, it's just going to take him time, but he'll still figure it out, right? You would like to go to the experts which can do it right for the first time, right? Because making mistakes in some areas, right? For example, security, well, can be expensive. Just ask the guys at Equifax, right? So we, as a company, can help you to reduce your risk in areas of security, availability, performance, time to market, get things quickly, right? As well as with a completely non-technical things as a staff turnover, right? Because if you happen to have, one DBA you rely on completely, and he leaves, well, and you don't have any other relationship, well, you kind of can be screwed a little bit. Now, we also believe there is a lot of importance beyond performance. I believe, we as Percona have been very well known for our performance work with MySQL and more recently with MongoDB. But I believe when it comes to software adoption, now it's really adopted based on usability and convenience and ease of use first, and performance may come second, right, or even third. And this is what we are spending a lot of time and focus right now, investing in increasing the ease of use of software, such as simplifying deployment and management, investing in building better documentation, reference architecture, and recipes, which we're going to provide, as well as partner with industry leaders to meet you on the platforms where you are and where you're comfortable. We're speaking about the cloud providers, the companies like Mesosphere and others. Now, few things I wanted to mention, few specific things, would be my rocks. We have been doing a lot of work with Facebook recently on getting RocksDB included in Percona server, and now it's available for you as a part of Percona server 5.7. We would encourage you to download it, give it a try, and give us your feedback, because it is with your feedback when software really becomes generally available. Percona X3B cluster, I would also suggest you to check out that release if you are really caring about MySQL havability. Again, besides performance, we really invested a lot of time in security and ease of use. Especially, I would like to highlight our integration with ProxySQL, which really allows you to deploy a cluster with a load balancing and traffic management by ProxySQL very easily. And finally, I would mention our work with Percona monitoring management, which we really want to build a free and open source solution for troubleshooting and performance optimization of MySQL and MongoDB. We saw there is a lot of need in that, because while this is a very core function what a lot of DBAs have to do, there was not really a lot of easy to use open source software in the field, and we decided to build one. Okay, at this point I also wanted to again thank our all sponsors for sponsoring this event. Without your support, that would be hard for us to put an event like that and feed you so much coffee and pastries. So thank you. And reminder again for people who slept in and woke in late, what we are going to have in about half a year, the conference in California. So please submit a talk or submit the date to your boss to approve your travel well in advance, right? And don't plan vacation on those days and do all other things you have to do. Yes, yeah. And with this, I wanted to transition to the next type of our keynotes. Something we tried, I think, starting in the Amsterdam last year, is to bring into the stage in the keynote as a short presentation by some of the interesting open source projects. We got a lot of great response from that, and we're doing that again this year. And we'll have those folks on the list that really talk about what have they've been doing. And why you should care about their projects. And with this, let me welcome here our own Michael Coburn, who will show you a brief demo of what you can do with our monitoring software, PMM, Percona monitoring management. Hi, Michael. Do you want also to know? Yeah, you just can go to.
I'll use the microphone and sign.
Okay, yes, and this is, you see the big glitter. Don't click the red button, it launches the missile.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Peter.